Hello and welcome back to the Retro Asylum podcast. A very special episode for us today. I'm joined by Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hello, how are we doing?
Very well, mate, very well. And very special guest, Richard Moss, podcaster, author, filmmaker, and overall football game guru. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Delighted to be here.
Yes, so we are, as we record, we are on the eve, for those of us in the UK, or the day, for those of us in Australia, of the release of A Tale of Two Halves, the tome penned by Richard and to be published by Bitmap Books. And Richard is here to tell us all about it. So, Richard, first of all, very grateful for you to coming on and sparing the time to speak to us.
Oh, it's not a problem at all. You know, I will talk anywhere, anytime about this book. I think it's like a dream project for me. And it's also really cool for me because I remember my publisher and designer, Sam Dyer, listening to him on the Retro Asylum.
Former host, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
so it's a nice full circle thing. Like when I was early in my career, just getting started writing about games, hearing Sam talking about like, sensible soccer with you guys.
Yeah, and now he's a business partner.
Yeah.
On football games, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, look, I've had a burning question in mind. So, as we've already alluded to, and people have probably picked up from your accent, you're an Australian.
Mm-hmm.
And you've written a very comprehensive book about the beautiful game of football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world. So, look, before we get into the book and some of the games, where does the love of football come from for you?
And do you have a team?
Well, do you have a team? And this is a very important question.
Right, so these days, I don't really do teams.
You're just being diplomatic
except
now,
Australia.
Richard. Come on, you can tell us.
So I stopped with supporting an individual team years ago.
Okay.
Just across all sports, I don't do that anymore. I watch for the joy of it.
So we'll just take that as you just said Liverpool, so that's all right. So,
but I mean, you're gonna hate me. When I was a kid, it was Man United.
Oh no! That was
because Ryan Giggs was my favorite player, and so I was like, I love him, so I'll follow the team. As I got older, I'm like, this whole supporting a club thing is a bit silly. I've never been to the UK. why am I following a team? And my dad's English, so I could follow my dad's team, which is Brighton. But
that's respectable. I'm not quite cancelling my pre-order just yet.
Stop doing it. Why football?
Yeah, football.
It comes from my dad, I think. You know, he came to Australia when he was about 10 years old, and he super passionate about football, all sports. He watches like all the time. Every night he'll watch sport, but football is his big love. And so I was introduced to football probably before I could walk. I'm very early on watching football games with my dad. My dad started playing again. Like he'd stopped and he was playing other things, but he got back into playing. So watching in his 40s and his 50s, watching my dad play football, having him as a coach, starting to play football games myself. I don't know exactly what the first one I got exposed to was. It was probably like one of the late 80s or early 90s games, just given my age. The earliest one I can remember is Manchester United Europe, which was micro league action sports soccer or something here. They gave it a different name. And then like playing FIFA and stuff on the consoles. So it's always been there, and it's something that has been a constant in my life as a passion, as a hobby. I played football for many years too. You know, as every kid does, I had dreams of being a pro. I actually got pretty good, but I wasn't physically up to going further. I was very injury prone, and I'm skinny. I'm small. So I was a bit soft, and I'd get knocked off the ball too easily. Even though I had great skills, I wasn't tough enough. And
so a little bit of Messi and a little bit of Darren Anderson thrown in for good measure by the sounds of it. Was your dad a gamer as well, or was that more of a solitary pursuit for you?
He would play games, but he didn't really stick with it much. So he would play. I'd play him on Nintendo Game Boy golf and tennis.
Okay.
But we'd have tournaments in those games, very simple games, and Super International Cricket game made here in Melbourne on the SNES. That was one that he spent a lot of time with. Premier Manager 2.
Yeah.
But after that, like he never really kept going. It was partly a time thing because he was working all the time, really hard working guy. And also the games got a bit complicated for him.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So when you were growing up then, you mentioned Manchester United, just trying to kind of contextualise this for where your nostalgia is. So what were you a home computer person, or were you more of a console person?
In terms of playing football games, I was more console person, but across the board with games, I was more home computer. So I grew up with a Mac.
Yeah.
My first book, Secret History Mac Gaming, I always keep a copy up on the shelf behind me. It's it's very special project to me. It was besides the football book, that's the other thing I really dreamed of doing, because growing up, hearing people saying, "Oh, there's no games on the Mac," and I'm like, "Yes, there are, and some of them are actually really cool."
I could write a whole book on them for
exactly. I can write a book about this. I'll prove it.
Sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Yeah. So I did this like huge journalistic tome on that, and I loved playing games on the Mac. There was lots of really interesting stuff, particularly in the earlier days. Like the black and white era and the earlier color era, and so the 80s and the early 90s. A lot of really interesting games on the platform. But there was like no football games.
No.
The earliest one, if you don't count super shoddy, barely functional stuff, the earliest one was Mac Football Manager, which was like 98, I think.
98?
And it was like playing a management game from the 80s on the 8-bit machines.
Yeah.
So it's like Tracksuit Manager or something has been ported to a modern platform.
The state of the art have moved on just a little bit.
Yeah. And it was like 2 years later that we started getting Championship Manager games. But it was really dicey for a long time there. So I had to do...
That market
I had to do all my football
then?
gaming on... Yeah, it was all on console or my brother's black and white laptop, where I played Premier Manager and Championship Manager. That was it. That's all I really had. So I love management games, but I wasn't able to really get into them until like around 2000 or so. And around that time, Amiga emulation also got good enough, so I was able to go back and play some stuff I'd missed.
Yeah. For sure. So if you could choose one genre, would you choose to play like a management type game over actually playing a game of football, or?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I'd make a choice. I guess it sort of depends on the mood, depends on the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I count Premier Manager 2, Champman 2000, 2001, a couple of other sports interactive games among my all-time favorites. But I'm also like, I adore the Pro Evo series in the PS2 era and ISS in the SNES and PS1 eras. And there's a handful of other really strong games like FIFA 10. This Is Soccer is really cool. Like, there's all these other really great action games that I really love too.
98. That's Three Lions 98 made your relegation zone in the book, and it was actually one that I was pretty fond of back in the day.
It's you can have fun with any football game.
Yeah, for sure.
But a lot of them are really shoddy. Technically, you can tell they've run into trouble, or they bit off more than they can chew. And I think that's what happened with Three Lions. It's like they had good ideas, but they needed another year to work on that or something to make it a good game.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that's right. So when did you I mean, given the other projects you've done, you've talked about the Secret History of Matt Gaiman. You obviously had the first person shooter movie. There was the Shareware book as well. When did you first have the idea of chronicling the history of football games?
The very first time I had the idea would have been about 10 years ago.
Okay.
It was so a bit of background. I was doing these like big genre history feature articles for Ars Technica, which is an American site, a great site, covers technology and games.
Yeah.
And as like my first professional outlet, actually, I wrote a history of adventure games that I wish I could go back and rewrite because I was so like green then. But I did that, and then sort of they let me keep coming back and doing more genres. Yeah. But after I'd done 3, 4, maybe 5 of them, I was like, I'd really love to do football games. And I'm thinking about this. How could I convince this American team with a predominantly American audience that they should let me write about soccer? And
they would love Peter Shilton's Handball Maradona. Like, they just haven't discovered it yet.
I never had the courage, I guess, to pitch it to them. Yeah. But it stayed in the back of my mind, and this whole game encyclopedia thing started to become really prominent. Yeah, and so it started to bubble up in my mind, and eventually got to the point where I'm like, "Hang on, I could do this now." I know Sam; he's putting out these great books at Bitmap. Yeah. Going into genres, going into platforms. I know he likes football because I've heard him talk about it. Yeah, I should mention this as a possible next project. So I said to him, I could do football games, real-time strategy games, or something else. I think it was like city builders as a project with you. What do you think? And he's like, football games. Let's do football games. I'm really into. I love football.
And there's a definite gap in the market for it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it was something which. I don't know, it might have been you, Jim, or there was certainly, I've had a conversation with someone, I reckon, in the last couple of years saying, like, wouldn't it be cool to, like, go through, like, the history, maybe not chronicle the history in this way, but to pick out some of the prominent games. I mean, I also podcast on the Kane and Rinse podcast, and I know, Richard, that you've spoken with Leon Cox over there a few years ago. We did an episode on the history of FIFA last year, and that was interesting, going back right to the start of the FIFA series and taking it right through, to the move to EAFC. But it's so much work to even touch upon each of the games. I mean, when you first spoke to Sam and he said, "Yeah, let's do football games," I mean, did you think, "Oh crikey, now where do I start?" I mean, how did you even conceptualize this in your mind as to how it might be structured or you might go about it?
Yeah, I got to confess to a bit of naivety here. I'm like, how many football games can there actually be?
Oh, yeah,
it must
there's
be
only
like
a dozen or so,
500 or something in the whole history. And I started to look into it, and I found out there's like 2,000 plus. It depends on how you count it. Yeah. Like, are you counting all these really crappy amateur little things? Are you going to count games that aren't football per se, but they're football themed? Which I decided that I'm going to include some of that stuff. So the further I looked, the more frighteningly big the genre got in my mind. Yeah, and so I spent a long time just trying to figure out, well, how can I distill the essence of this while also being comprehensive? Because the idea was like, I'm going to pick most of the games in the genre's history to look at, and that was like, that's not possible. The book would be thousands of pages long, unless it was a little tiny blurb for every one, and I'd still be working on it regardless if I decided to be totally comprehensive.
But also, I think it's got to be readable as well, right? I mean, people have got to be able to pick it up. I mean, I'm someone who'll read this book cover to cover, but I know other people will dip in, dip out. It's got to work, hasn't it, as a piece of entertainment for someone who's sitting and reading it as well.
Yeah, and that was part of the concept right from the start. It's like Sam was asking me, what kind of book is this? How do you envision it being? And I'm like, well, it's got to be a coffee table book because it's nostalgia, it's fun. People grew up playing these games. They want to be able to dip back in and reminisce about the ones they love, but learn more about how they worked and get that context of all the stuff that they missed and how the genre was evolving, and like find out about these weird obscure things like a Polish penalty kick simulator. Like it's weird stuff that they never would have heard of. And so early on I had this sense that, well, it only makes sense to be chronological because football games, there's something that get iterated on year by year. Plus, football is something that's like seasonal. And I was thinking about it, and it's like, well, 1980 seems to be sort of the point at which the genre properly begins. Before that, it's
you can almost recognise what's on the screen as football rather than something which is like an abstract or
like a Pong variant, I suppose, wasn't it? Before that,
it's like it's almost all Pong before that. I did find a game called Car Polo from 77, I think, which is football with cars. So before Top Gear did it, before Rocket League.
Back
in 77, there was a game in the arcades that was 4 players, and you're driving little cars around. They even had steering wheels, I think. And you're bumping the ball around.
I want to find a mainframe running Frogmaster, which you pick up in your intro. I mean, 1966, man.
It's a weird game to play because it's like it's soccer, it's American football, and it's something completely its own as well. It's this weird mishmash of stuff.
But you can draw the line back, right? I mean, at some point you've got to. There's always a first for everything, and I think what I found, and as I said to you in the green room before, tried not to dive, and Sam kindly sent us a preview copy of it, but I'm desperately trying not to dive in too deep because This Is My Christmas Day is in those pages. So, but I was reading the introduction and I was thinking, you've done a good job of drawing the line, taking the line right back as far as you can, because at some point there was the first video game that resembled football, from which EAFC is a distant derivative, and it was fascinating to see that that's how far you could take it back to 1966.
Yeah, and as we're saying, it really started to coalesce into something recognizable about 1980 with the Intellivision game, Soccer on the Intellivision, and if you go and look at that, and you look at the latest stuff, it's really recognizable as okay, this came from that. Obviously what we have now is so much more sophisticated, but I suppose it's football, so like how complicated can it be that something is going to look like something? Well, it's all trying to resemble the sport, but it is kind of crazy that the very first thing that looked like football also looks like the latest football games. It had the TV style view. It had what seemed like it was 11 players on the pitch, even though it was not.
The illusion.
I was just going to say that there's the arcade cabinet that's in there for dribbling. The dribbling arcade cabinet. It just looks like a thing of beauty. I'd love to sit and play that. Yeah,
that cannot play well though. I mean, just look.
I suppose it's more about the experience, though, isn't it? When you're sitting and playing something like that.
Yeah. So that was so. Did you have this idea? Because one of the interesting things that the book does, it replicates seasons in football. And I think that's a really good touch of like taking a couple of years at once and looking at it within that time span. It kind of almost chapters it, which is helpful if you're reading it, but also kind of links that back to football. Was that something that occurred to you as an idea pretty early on?
That was something that came out of discussions that Sam and I had early on.
Okay.
I was, like I said, chronological right away. It's got to be chronological. But the seasons was his idea from hearing me talking about my idea, where I wanted to, every year or every season, I wanted to have some big picture context. I wanted to be like, this is what's happening in the football world at this time.
Yeah.
This is what's happening in the video game football world at this time. This is sort of where they're mixing and interacting with each other, which is basically not at all in the early days, but they started to get more involved with each other later on.
Yeah.
And this is maybe some technological stuff that's going on in the game scene as well, like new platforms releasing and stuff. And Sam just sort of said to me, "Hey, how about we do seasons?"
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yes, great idea.
Yeah. With the end of season awards as well, which allows you to kind of have a bit of a joke, with the end of the worst game, and you got the graphics there. It's as I said, it kind of compartmentalizes kind of the games as well, doesn't it? And chapters it, which I think is useful. Mm. And then you go up to 2010, and the decision to kind of stop there was based on what?
Just the fact that there wasn't proper competition in the genre anymore.
Yeah.
By then, it was, if you go back, like if you're playing football games now and you go back to 2010 and you play those games, there's not a huge amount of difference in how they work. I find the games from then actually better and more appealing than the games now. I think they've sort of lost the plot a bit now, and that's because they've not got the competition that they used to have.
Yeah.
So you go back to then, and the last of the competition was kind of dying off. FIFA Manager was becoming irrelevant. The last Championship Manager game after the split, the Sports Interactive Eidos split, the last one of those came out. There were a couple of other things. After that, it's FIFA versus Pro Evo, and then FIFA versus eFootball, and now eFootball versus EA Sports FC. Crazy names. And eFootball is almost irrelevant despite having like 700 million players or something. No one really rates it anymore.
I've never.
And then on the management, on the management side, FIFA Manager, the last game was 2014 Classic or something like that, a Legacy Edition maybe, which was just them going, well, we've already been cancelled, but we'll give you a season update for one extra game. And there's been nothing. There's been nothing to compete with Football Manager at the top level. Just like top 11 and a few others on mobile is basically all the competition they have. Yeah. And so there's this huge vacuum at the top of the genre. You've got some little casual-minded indie things and free-to-play mobile games. And you've got EA and you've got SI, and that's it. So there wasn't anything exciting to write about after that, except a handful of games, which is why we had we had just like a 2-3 page, whatever it was, a section at the end of here's some highlights that's come since then, just to catch you up.
Yeah, sure. I was only thinking today actually that it's a scene, it's a space that the indie scene hasn't really dived into either. Where in other genres of games, that the indie scene almost picks up the slack for the big developers who've stopped doing things. Whereas, I mean, I was looking for an alternative to Football Manager just on Steam today, just having a browse, inspired by leafing through the book. There wasn't really anything there, to be honest. Nothing that caught my attention anyway.
Yeah, there's about a dozen other games, I think, right? And none of them really have the same quality or sense of appeal to them. Some of them are trying to be throwbacks to some older games, but they're a bit clumsy. Some of them are obviously free-to-play mobile type games, but on PC.
Yeah, or others just look like rip-offs, kind of cheap rip-offs, which is not what you want. Compare that to, looking at the pages on the 90s in your book. I mean, what a time. I mean, I reckon I played pretty much all of those. But what a time. There were so many different games, weren't there? And like manager games, playing games, there was just so many of them. It was a great time to be growing up.
It's immense. And if you look at if you look at the contents page of the book, you see how it sort of just balloons out in the middle part of the book because there's so many games coming out in that mid to late 90s era. I had to show some restraint not to just have the whole book turn into a coverage of 95 to 2002 peak era for the genre.
1,000 pages. So you've already said that you couldn't include every single football game that wouldn't have been viable. How did you consult with Sam, or did you just make your own decisions? And when you made those decisions as to what games to include, what did you base that on?
It was all my choice. So if something is not there, and you wanted it there, I'm the person to get mad at.
Send the emails to Sam Dyer.
It was hard deciding what to put in, what to leave out sometimes. There are actually some that I cut really late on. Where I'm like, I think this is going to be in there, but then I'm looking over what I'm producing and I'm like, there's nothing really interesting about this game. Why are we bothering with half a page for it? I think I should just cut it to make the book more readable. It's already 600 plus pages. So we don't want to have it just have filler in there. So I was thinking about games in terms of what is this contributing that's different? What makes it worthwhile to discuss now? So if it's just copying other games, that's probably not very interesting, depending on what it's copying. There are exceptions, of course, as with everything, but most things that are like clones and copies of popular games, I just cast aside. If something was sort of competent, but it's not doing anything new or different, it's not trying to bring new ideas, it's not really innovating, then it's also not really worth covering in my mind. And I did try to be pretty gentle with what I considered new ideas. I let a lot of stuff through. Well, as you say,
football is football, right? I mean, there's only so much they can do with it.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that you also had a sense of how much crap there is in the genre. There's so much here. There are so many games getting released, and so I wanted to make sure that when you're looking at the book, you're getting that sense of, it's not just the 5 or 6 big franchises through the history. No, there are hundreds of games coming out. And most of them are bad. The default is that it's bad. The good games are the exception, but also every bad game has something interesting about it, and that meant trying to be really kind to things and just going, well, what's the new idea here, or what's the little twist that it has, or why might you want to go back and give this a look, even though it's bad. Like Three Lions, it's a bad game, but it's got that potential.
Grey England kit's nice, right? But this is the thing, though, right? I mean, you go back to most. I've just kind of scrolling through the PDF as you're talking. I've settled upon Real Sports Soccer Atari 5200 game from, most Atari 5200 games you go back to. They've aged like sour milk, haven't they, really? And I can imagine a football game on that system has aged particularly bad. But I suppose you've got to be a little bit sensitive when you're looking at these things and look, as you say, look at them in the context and see what did they add to the kind of state of the art, rather than what are they like to play, because it's always going to compare quite badly with the modern stuff.
If I'd written this book from a really pure, unfiltered modern perspective, it would be just like page after page of this game.
This is terrible. This is terrible.
So I had to try my best to get in the head of someone playing it then, and that often meant like seeing their magazine reviews I can read, and looking at what people thought of it then.
Yeah.
And it helped also that I was mostly playing chronologically as well as writing it chronologically. So I'm seeing, okay, this is actually making some improvements. This is good compared to what came before. I can see how they're doing new things here. And even then, though, some stuff is kind of bland. Like Real Sports Soccer on the 5200, it got called "It's just football" in reviews. They weren't really excited about it then either. It was a competent game for the time. That's all. And if you look at it technologically, it's like, okay, they are trying to innovate because you can kick the ball in the air or on the ground, which was a novel idea at the time.
And that's what you've got. I mean, and that's what you do a good job, I think, of drawing out in the descriptions. You talk about, it is things like, there is the illusion of more players on the pitch, or there's a graphic of a net on the goal, for instance. And I think it does sound a bit silly, but they were things which were. I know when I was a kid, seeing the referee for the first time. Remember in Sensible Soccer, the ref used to run on and show the player the yellow card.
Yeah.
I love that.
Or things like when you hear like when the Saints in like match day 2 and and being able to edit the team names and things like that.
Yeah, or in Emlyn Hughes International Soccer when they'd actually come out and line up, it's like little things like that, which, as a kid, we were so far away from where we are now, I think, in the late 80s and early 90s, that any kind of little innovation like that was a big thing. But Richard, did you play all of these games?
Yeah, I personally played everything.
Wow.
With, I think, 2 or 3 exceptions that were later in the book where you can't play them anymore. The game's not available. It's been delisted. Like Football Manager had an online version that couldn't play because it's gone.
Sure.
But just to add to what you were saying, I've got somewhere on the shelf behind me in my bookshelves, I've got a boxed copy of the first Commodore 64 International Soccer, the one from, was it 83 or 84, that was hugely popular. And I couldn't help but laugh. Like, I literally laughed out loud when I looked at the box because it's saying proudly, we've got throw-ins on the back of the box. We've got throw-ins and we've got headers, and these are our big, huge key features that we're going to sell this game with. You can head the ball and you can throw it in.
I wonder
realism.
I wonder if EA Sports are listening. They're obviously missing a trick in the marketing of their recent game, because they don't harp on about throw-ins. But we can laugh about it now. But they were things that I think we did get. That was certainly something I will get excited about. The fact that little things, being able to make a substitute in games. That was a relatively late addition, but it was amazing. You felt like you had all of this control. Did you find Football Manager gets a lot of early coverage in the book? And I think obviously it's a very famous game. Did you find that when you started getting into the management games, even the early ones, did you find that they've aged better? Were they more enjoyable to go back and play? Depends on the game. Football Manager on the Spectrum or the C64 is still a lot of fun. It's still heaps and heaps of fun. Is the play loop on it is just so tight and so well honed. Kevin Toms is actually a very good game designer who thought a lot about how are you going to interact with this, and it's very intentional in how it deals with the limitations of the technology. But then there are some other games like I'm trying to think of, what was it called? There was one that was just so boring. I almost fell asleep playing it because it's taking so long. Was it The Double? That was one I hadn't heard of, actually, The Double. It was one of the few in the book that I have no recollection of. Even for a management game, The Double will test your patience, is what I wrote. And so it was actually fairly well reviewed at the time. There were some positive reviews. Yeah. But there were others who were recognizing that this is really tedious. And the
the big issue was not just that it had too much detail, that you sort of got bogged down in menus, but that then you go into matches and you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen for 15 minutes.
That's
because
not fun.
It plays out the entire game in accelerated real time.
Oh Lord.
And so you're watching these guys who, this is Spectrum and Commodore 64, so the AI is almost non-existent.
Yeah, that's
you're
not
just watching these little tiny sprites just kicking the ball side to side. It's like the Simpsons episode where they go to a soccer game and they're watching and everyone in the crowd's just falling asleep. And you got the Mexican commentator going, halfback passes to center, passes to halfback, passes to center, and just keeps going on about how exciting it is that they're passing the ball back and forth between each other. That's what playing that game is like. You have to be really really into it to get excited by it. So some stuff is aged
found the page actually in the book. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look great, does it?
Yeah, I always sort of strayed away from the management games. I always sort of went towards the actually playing the football side of things. I think I was just maybe a little bit too young. I do remember Kevin Toms and firing it up and just not having a clue.
Yeah. It was, I think for me, playing Football Manager for the first time, and I think I played the later port of it. I think it was ported to the Amiga, wasn't it, at some point? And that's the version I played. And it's funny, isn't it? You get a bit hyperbolic about this, but actually, it completely changed the way I look. I mean, I must have spent hundreds. That was a game my dad would play with me, so I must have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours playing Football Manager. I mean, there's so much nostalgia there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, isn't it, about football games and sports games? Like a lot of dads, stereotyping obviously, but a lot of dads would have sat with their kids and played these games. So that's a big sort of like emotional part of some of these games as well.
And siblings too. I used to play. I used to play with my brother all the time. I play FIFA on the SNES with my brother. We'd have our little tournaments together, and I know that heaps of people can wax nostalgic about like Sensi tournaments in their house, whole family sometimes even. Father and sons, and maybe you can rope a mum or sisters into if they can give you if they've got the patience for football. But it's something that is very much a familial experience growing up playing football games. It's sports games. It's recognizable. Sure. It's not like playing a platformer or a shooter or something where you've got to have this games specific knowledge about how things work. You've got to have played the games. You've got to know the controller and stuff. Football is football. It looks like football. Someone can walk into the room and go, "Oh, you're playing a football game. Have a go."
Yeah, and I understand how that works. Like on a fundamental level, I know how to play a football game. Yeah, no, it's true. How did the World Cup license games over the years have had a particularly bad time of it, haven't they? How were they going back to them? I mean, I even remember the USA 94 one. Absolutely terrible. How were they kind of revisiting those?
It got great towards the end. I had the best time playing the 2010 game, which is one of the best ever football games, I think, from EA, because that's when FIFA was at its peak. So that's a really good game. Then going back, 2002's official game, that's also EA. That was hilarious because it's so melodramatic and crazy with the cinematics. Things will you score the first goal and it goes into slow motion, and you're watching your guys going in slow motion, and there's confetti coming down, and there's orchestral music playing.
Wow, I need to go back to FIFA 2002. I don't remember that.
And
that's hilarious.
98 was the first one from EA, and
Road to the World Cup. That was
a lot of people loved that.
Yeah.
That's held up sometimes as one of the better football games ever,
for sure,
within the context of its time.
Yeah,
but before that, it's pretty rough territory. 94, as you say, it was a tough game to enjoy.
Wasn't it? Was a US Gold release at 94? Was absolutely terrible? Yeah,
US Gold, and it was. It feels like calling it a poor man's Sensi is being kind.
Yeah.
It didn't work out well at all. You've got the Velcro feet going on, the ball sticking to the player's feet. The AI's crap. The presentation's not very good, except the menus look kind of nice. US Gold always very good at presentation. If you look at their games. But there's no substance in that one. That's one that I played back in the day. I think
me too.
I think I got it as a rental, which was a special privilege to get games from the video store for me. That was not good. That was not money well spent. And before that, what was weird, and we've got a bit in the book about this, is that before that, there were so many World Cup games.
I couldn't believe how many there were for Italia 90.
Yeah.
14 games.
14? Jesus. Yeah, that's a lot.
I mean, there were 2 that were official, but 12 others that were unofficial World Cup games that year. And
we were
most
still
of
in the
them
Wild West
bad.
in 1990.
And of all the World Cups as well, for there to be 14 games about, it's Italia 90, which is... It's not a very good tournament. It's pretty boring. FIFA changed rules because of that tournament. About how football works. Like we've got... They got rid of back pass, right? In large part because that was a really boring tournament. Hardly any goals.
Because Argentina spent the whole tournament just kicking it back to their goalkeeper. That is true.
So 1990, not a great year. The best football game about the World Cup was a kickoff add-on disc.
I remember it.
And the rest of them were not very good. There were like some nice ideas, like the Italian teenagers, the Dardari brothers had a couple of games that were kind of fun, but really rough around the edges. Not much else to speak of. If people want to know, you can look at the book. I've got a paragraph about each of the 14.
I'm looking at it. It's hard to believe that there were so many. And some pretty nasty memories.
If you go back to 86, that was, speaking of nasty memories, 86 was the infamous World Cup Carnival. One of the worst football games of all time, one of the worst games of all time. It got a
Did they get
0
1% in Zap magazine? I think
0, but they gave it a 0.
It got 0.
Because it was a game that had already come out. And was crap then, 2 years earlier. and they put it out again with some little like minor cosmetic changes and a couple of mini games that got coded in a month or something. They had a few weeks. These guys who actually were good game developers went on to work on Beneath the Steel Sky.
Really?
So proper talent. These kids that got pulled in to write it like a training mode and update the advertising hoardings in the background of the game. What a horrible thing to have to do your first job out of school, to spend a few weeks working on this terrible game that shouldn't have come out the first time. And it's a funny story, because they got the license, but they sort of forgot to make the game. There was a miscommunication between US Gold and Ocean.
That is true. Actually, they literally forgot to make the game.
And whatever went on behind the scenes, the details are lost to history. But US Gold thought that Ocean were making the game. Ocean didn't realize that they were meant to be making the game.
Oh wow!
Or maybe there was something that was sort of prototyped a bit and wasn't working out well. Whatever happened, it got to a couple of months before they needed to have it out. And US Gold is asking how's it going, and oops. it's not going.
Awkward silence ensues.
They'd spent however much money it was, heaps of money getting a license, and they didn't want to just let that go. So this is the first licensed World Cup game. So they looked around and they saw that Arctic had a couple of games. That and Arctic were having financial troubles, so they made a deal to put out World Cup Football.
That's unbelievable.
Was the original name from '84 on the Spectrum, and they just updated it a little bit, and they made a really beautiful box. One of the nicest ever boxes you will have come
People
across.
will forget that the game's the same if we make this really cool box.
and people would talk about it in the reviews as well. The box is amazing. It's got all these cool goodies in it. But then they'd be so angry. So they'd praise the box, but then they would go nuts about how bad the game is, and they'd be like, they have cheated us all. They'd be really fuming, and that's why Zap gave it a 0.
I mean, it wasn't even angry. A reskin, was it? It was barely even a reskin. I think they did change some of the colours, but there was no time. There
was no time to fix the game. It's such a bad game.
Yeah. Unbelievable. There's stories like that make you realise that the 80s are well missed. It never happened now.
No.
What would you say was the golden age then? So, you cover 1980 to 2010 in the book. If you could pick one season as you've done it here, what would be your absolute favourite? Having now gone back and revisited these games.
Oh, geez, one season. Here, let me.
All right. Well, if that's too narrow, what about a period then? If you could choose, if you could only play football games from one, say, 5-year period, what would it be?
Well, if we went for a period, I'd say it'd be like maybe 2003 to 8, something like that.
Oh yeah.
For me personally, because. I love Pro Evo, and that was its peak time, late in the PS2's life. That was the peak period.
Was that 4 or 5? Is it?
Yeah. So 4, 5, 6 was a good one too, and they actually kept going on the PS2 with the original engine as well.
Yeah,
so
they did. Yeah.
So those games are secretly good. Like the fans call the 2008 game. Pro Evo 2008, the lost Pro Evo, because the PS3 and Xbox 360 game was terrible, but the PS2 one is actually a good game.
Did that get a commercial release? Did it in 2008 for the PS2?
Yeah, and it's underrated, but actually quite a good game. It's got probably the smartest AI of all the PS2 games. It's not got as much variation in the football as 5 does. So it's debatable whether it's a better game, but the AI is really good. So it's actually very challenging until you have an amazingly good team, and then it gets sort of easy.
Yeah.
Was there ever the temptation to try and pick up all of these games as you were writing the book, like the actual sort of software, or was it just a case of this? You see a few prices and think, oh no,
and how deep are your pockets?
Yeah, this could get out of hand pretty quick.
I'm laughing and turning and looking at a pile that I have on the floor of stuff that I bought. I bought more than I should have. I spent hundreds of dollars picking up stuff. I've got some boxed games that I don't really have room to display, and I've got a lot of PS1 and PS2 football games. Those because I still have the systems and can play those. It didn't make much sense to go out and buy heaps of 8-bit games. I did get a couple, but I mostly avoided that. I do have a couple of Amiga things. I've never actually owned an Amiga. I just wanted to have a copy of the game because I thought, well, this is a cool game. It'd be nice to own one. Yeah. So I did go out and I tried to get all the ones that I had loved growing up. So Premier Manager, Championship Manager. Early FIFA was a lot of fun. So I got that. So I went and bought those, but then I also went a bit nuts with the PS2 era. I have every Pro Evo from the first one until 2000 until Pro Evo 6. So I have 1 to 6 and a few others.
They're pretty cheap though,
I have
right?
like
The Pro
every
Evo
FIFA.
Games.
Yeah, Pro Evo is great.
They're pretty cheap though as well, aren't they, to pick up those football games? Because they sold so many. They tend to be pretty cheap to pick up.
The most that I spent on a Pro Evo game would have been like 15 Australian dollars, so under 10 quid. Really cheap.
That's so much value.
And FIFA as well. It's also really cheap. So I've got every FIFA. I think almost every FIFA ever, and most of them I got in 2 eBay listings. As a collection. like $20. Here's 8 FIFA games.
Nice.
Okay, I'll take that deal.
It's good fodder for the book.
Even the Game Boy ones.
Do you have how was it going back to? So Championship Manager is one of my favourite games of all time, particularly either 01, 02 or... Yeah, I would say 01, 02 is probably if it's not my favourite game of all time, it's pretty darn close. I've always been really nervous about either going back to those classic Championship Managers or even firing up one of the more recent ones, even though the complexity scares me. Just about losing myself. I'm someone who likes to play a whole wide range of games, and I do podcasts and everything. Did you feel like that creeping sense of addiction kicking in, revisiting some of those old manager games?
Yeah. I there's a lot of games that I played while working on this book that I really had to peel myself away from because I was getting into it. And even the very first Football Manager on the Spectrum, I played like 3 seasons or something of that when I only needed to play 1 season. I couldn't stop playing. I kept going. And there were a lot of games that I would play beyond the point where I needed to. Sometimes I finished writing the entry and I went back and I kept playing because I just couldn't help myself. And the thing with the classic Championship Managers is that it does take a little bit of time to get back into it. Yeah. So there's this weird feeling of familiarity and alienness that comes with playing them.
Really?
It's like, I remember this game, I love this game, and hang on, is that how it worked?
Yeah.
That's a bit clunky.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was that clunky. I had to click here and click there. Like changing your formation, you want to change where players are, you got to like click on their number and then click on what they got to do, and then you click. There's so many clicks in the early Championship Manager games,
and they're so ugly, aren't they? As well, like the color palette of it's so garish. And I mean, looking at some of those screenshots, which jump off the page because it's so nostalgic, but then you think, why did they use like red and blue in the menus together? It just looks horrible.
And I never knew that, and because, like I said earlier, my brother had a black and white laptop, so I'm seeing things in 4 shades of grey. And I'm like, these games are great, I love them. And then early 2000s, I think, on my Amiga emulator, I fired up these games. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I saw the graphics. Why are there so many colours?
Is there something wrong with my monitor? But they kept the same user interface for so long into the series. I mean, I think it was only in the early 2000s that they really ditched that. The square boxes and, as you say, the clunky clicks. I always remember that to kind of swap your players. It was far more clicks. There was no dragging the numbers until much later in the series. But for a generation,
it was Championship Manager 3 that started to modernize it more.
Was it? Yeah, was it that? So yeah, there's a lot of games went before that.
So they were inspired with that one for the interface. They were like, we're going to make a start menu, basically. We're going to take the Windows start menu.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And we're going to make our own version of that.
Yeah.
And we're going to let you finally drag and drop things and have it work like a normal program in your operating system a bit more. They've been slowly improving the interface since then. It's still kind of unwieldy and overwhelming. I went and played the latest one, 2024, and oh boy, I got lost.
Yeah, it's so difficult now.
It's only been a few years since I last played, but the one that I previously played was Football Manager Classic on the Switch. So I went in sort of blind to how much the complexity has gone up. It's first mainline game I'd played in about 10 years, and I was really lost with it. I didn't know what I was doing, clicking around trying to figure out how does this work. This is I can recognize that this is Football Manager. I know I've got these things going on, but
just too much.
What am I doing? And the tutorials weren't really helping much either. So I hope when they get the new game sorted, because it just got delayed. When they finally get that sorted out, I hope that they've fixed all that they finally got a good onboarding experience for players again.
I think so.
Yeah. I think that's a common theme with some of, even like the later FIFAs as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's too much. Myself, I just want to go and play a game of football, but then you try to do like a career mode and maybe dabble in some of the transfer market, but then they throw training systems at you and all the rest of it. Yeah, sometimes it's good just to dial it back a little bit.
I think why the book speaks to me so much is that it's at some point, and I said this on the Cane and Rinse episode on the FIFA series, I feel like I've been left behind a little bit, and that's probably partly due to my age. I'm in my early 40s now, and I played so much of these games growing up that I feel like at some point I got off the train, and I think once you do, it's really difficult to get back on it. Because I think, as you just said, Richard, and as you said, Jim, you come away from Football Manager for 10 years and you try and go back to, and so much has changed. So much is familiar, but so much has changed. That going through this book and seeing, the games from the 90s and the early 2000s and thinking, man, it's easy with nostalgia. Nostalgia is such a powerful thing, to go back and yearn, but it's such a reminder of the way it was, when I was right in the thick of it, had my finger right on the pulse. I knew every single football game that was coming out. I would play almost all of them. And then at some point you stop. And when you stop, it's really difficult to get back on again, I think. So the book, I think, speaks to... I think it will speak really loudly to people of our generation who played a lot of these games growing up. It's such a powerful nostalgia feeling.
Yeah, and you see that with people who were playing in the early days but stopped, who stopped fairly early, who they played in the 8-bit days, but then they stopped. And then they tried again on the PlayStation 1 or 2 and they were lost because suddenly there's 8 buttons and there used to be 1 button.
Yeah.
And they haven't gone through the transition through to that. So they can't handle the complexity, or if they're into management games, it's it used to just be a few clicks here and there. You're going through, you pick your team, you go to a listing of transfers that you can make. You try and throw some numbers down to buy a player, and then you go into the match, and the tactics are just pick a formation basically.
Yeah.
But then suddenly in the early 2000s, you got to. You've got to set a dozen different strategic elements.
If the ball's in that part of the pitch, your players go here. I mean, you start to feel like you're kind of Pep Guardiola, don't you, a little bit? But it's, I mean, I think a lot of people harken back for those simpler times. Was there anything that surprised you, Richard? Was there anything that you booted up and you thought this, I'm thinking Hooligans Over Europe or something like that. Was there anything which you booted up expecting to be terrible, but which wasn't?
Yeah, definitely. That was not one of them.
No, I think so.
I thought this is not going to be good. Oh no, this is going to be so distasteful and And it was really an offensive game to play. You've got like this sort of squad of hooligans who are stereotypical hooligans. They're talking about like violence and drinking and stuff, and you round them all up, and you go and you take on the police, and they got their water cannons, and you.
Is it like a kind of quasi real-time strategy game? Is it?
Yeah, and you start fights, and you see your guys like dying, like actually dying because they'll fight with rival gangs, and they'll have weapons and things. It's just it's not a pleasant experience. I don't know how that got through to release. How did they not cancel it?
Thankfully, it'd never get released today, would it? So things have changed for the better in some ways.
It was really controversial at the time and got banned by Game and some other retailers. But anyway, to answer the question, games that surprised me, there were heaps. The first one that comes to mind wasn't something I thought would be bad. I thought it would be bland. I thought it would just be another game. It was Football Kingdom. It was a Namco game from about 2004, I think.
Okay.
And I thought it would just be another one of these also-rans from that era where people are going, we can make our own FIFA. Yeah. But then I played it and it was like, hang on, this is like an alternate reality Pro Evo. This is actually the beginnings of something that could be great.
I've never even heard of it.
No.
Yeah, it was only released in Japan, and it's called Football Kingdom Trial Edition. It's like the name clearly indicating that this is them sort of dipping their toes in to the football market. And sadly, they didn't continue. It was just the one game.
Yeah.
But it was like, it was clearly playing it was like someone had taken Pro Evo 1 or 2 and said, we can do that better. And then they actually pulled it off instead of like club football, which was let's make our own Pro Evo thing, but with everything licensed and right down to the super fine details on the kits and the player models and everything. That I got a story about that, by the way, from the producer who didn't want to make the game, but kind of was roped into it by his boss at Codemasters. And thought he was a bit untouchable because of the success of LMA. He didn't stand his ground and say no. He let it happen, and of course they couldn't do it because you need years to make something as good as Pro Evo. But Football Kingdom ended up being quite a good game. It's rough around the edges, but the controls feel great. Players online get really nerdy excited about the net physics of all things. Like the net bulges really realistically.
Again,
the fans on the forums, they're really into that. The passing is very good. It almost feels like manual passing. You've got like this arrow thing, and you can point where you want to go. So it's sort of it's the passing is more like what happened a bit later on with the sort of semi-assisted passing that you get in the PS3, Xbox 360 era onwards. So it feels a bit less on rails. And the AI has its moments. It's kind of up and down, but plays really well. It's a little bit frantic at times, the speed of it. But I was really surprised how good it was.
What platform? I was so disappointed. PS2?
Yeah, PS2. I was so disappointed that there wasn't another one. But there's someone trying to do a translation patch at the moment, a full patch of the game. Hoping that'll come out soon and I can properly enjoy playing it instead of just playing matches, like be able to really dive into the career mode. So that was one. Trying to think of others that were
anything kind of football adjacent. So, like you've obviously got the Roy of the Rovers graphic adventure in here, which is one that I remember from back in the day. Anything? What about that David Beckham platform game, the Mario clone?
Go David Beckham.
Go David Beckham.
Which that's a cool one, and it's very similar to Soccer Kid, which is another football adjacent one. From
that we
Chrysalis.
featured on this show a couple of years ago. So
the Go Beckham one is like Soccer Kid if it were made in the vein of Mario.
Yeah.
So like it's coming from a different angle of the same idea. Yeah. It's you got this kid going around with his ball in a platformer.
Yeah.
But instead of being inspired by like 8-bit home computer platform games, it's inspired by Mario type games, by the Japanese style of games. It's actually made in the UK, but clearly inspired by those kinds of things. And it's really good. It's a bit derivative, but it's very, very well done.
It's playable. There are gems.
There are. There's one I spoke to you about, Chris. Was it Moritz the Striker on the Spectrum?
Really good. So that's I don't know whether you know about that one, Richard. That's a modern indie game. It's a modern Spectrum game, like a homebrew game, which is a kind of a it's almost like a kind of Manic Miner meets Soccer Kid kind of thing, Jim, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, single screen sort of platformer with you. Yeah,
that's actually really good.
I don't know that one.
Any particular favourites? If there was one that you could pick, would it be a Pro Evo game from what you've said? If there was one game that you could pick?
I think at the moment my favourite all-time football game, this is hyper-specific, but it's Winning 11-9 Liveware Edition.
Yeah, so it's amazing how many people talk about Winning 11,
It's Pro Evo 5, but the last version of that, which was the Korean version. So what would happen is that Konami, in that era, they'd keep working on the game. So that, like, I don't know how they pulled it off. They'd be making the next season's game. At the same time, they'd have people who are kind of doing patches effectively for the current season's game for each of the subsequent releases. So you'd have like a Japanese release and a European release and an American release and then a Korean release. Yeah. And they'd keep improving it each time. Yeah, and so by the time you get to the Korean one, it's almost
like the ultimate version.
Yeah. It's the ultimate version of the game. And so you've got to deal with having Korean commentary, but you're not really missing that much because the commentary is a bit shite in English anyway.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
And the action feels so polished. It's really good. I was surprised when I was doing the book because I hadn't played it before that. I was surprised by how much better it feels. The little things make such a difference.
Interesting. Yeah.
Took one of my favorite games and it made it just that much better.
On the commentary, there's a lovely forward in there from Clive Tildesley.
Good, yeah.
I just wondered how that came around.
Sam pulled that off. We were talking about who could we ask to write the forward and throwing some names around and something that I think we both were keen on was the idea of getting a commentator, someone who's done commentary. Yeah. And I had put forward a few names and Sam thought that he could get Clive Tildesley. Yeah. And he sent out feeler and I don't know how he did it. You'd have to ask him the behind the scenes story, but he got Clive to do it. And it's really heartwarming.
It's lovely. Yeah. It really is, yeah. It's lovely. He tells a lovely little anecdote, doesn't he, about recording, how he spent a whole day in the studio recording the names of every player just in 3 different tones. Beckham. Just imagine doing it all day with different names. It is. It adds to that. There's something really warm about the book, and I've mentioned nostalgia loads of times, but I really do feel like probably more than anything I've read of, and I've got pretty much all of the Bitmap book stuff, and they're all really good in their own right. But for me personally, and it's a very individual thing, nostalgia. But for me personally, from the moment I read that forward and I read the introduction, there was just something instantly really warm about this book. And then once you start to leaf through it, the names and the screenshots, seeing things like, I think, is it European Soccer Manager, or it was one where you kind of sat. It was one of my absolute favourites back in the day. Nobody else I knew either had it or liked it. You had a little phone on your desk and you could pick it up and you could call the physio, and I absolutely love that game.
I remember the one you're talking about. Yeah, I'm scrolling through trying to see if I can find it, but
I was looking at it. It's called like European Soccer League or something like that. Because, you know, for me, like the ultimate football game is and I don't think it exists. And Richard, you'll tell me if it does exist, and in which case I'll be immediately coming off the call and going to find it. Is like to live the life of a football manager. That's why I wanted a game where you could, you could like GTA style drive into work. You pull up at the training ground, you'd set the training drills, and then you'd have to call the players' agents, and then you could watch the game from the. And like it never ever existed, and that is still my ultimate holy grail. If that ever, I think I'd stop playing all of the games if that exists.
I mean, there have been a bunch that have kind of played around with that idea. Games
Match of the Day was one, wasn't it?
We want to really put you in the game, let you play the role of football manager
like
rather
an
than
RPG,
just going through menus.
It sounds like The Sims mixed with Champ Manager or something.
I would absolutely like a slice of life thing where you played like the life of a football. Things like On the Ball. This obviously one that's covered a lot in the book, Richard. On the Ball had this feeling of putting you in the shoes of a manager because they had Ultimate Soccer Manager did a little bit as well in terms of that had elements of it, but it never. The other thing which I always loved as well was a good indoor game of football.
I love indoor.
Did Road to the World Cup have the FIFA 96 had the indoor mode? And
97,
really
97 and 98. Yeah, those two, 97 and 98, and there were a couple of striker games that had indoor. Not much else, sadly. The modern FIFAs have the Volta mode, which is like the reinvention of FIFA Street, which was not a great game. I feel like on FIFA Street they kind of missed the point.
Yeah,
they made it all about showboating and trickery.
Yeah.
But that's not what street football is about.
No.
It's about it's the love of kicking the ball around, doing the dribbling, playing against each other.
You know, yeah, it's that kind of thing. And then the other one was like, I always wanted a really good, like, you remember Peter Shilton? There was the Peter Shilton game. Like, I always wanted
Peter Shilton's handball Maradona.
No, wasn't there another one where you actually played as a goalie? Maybe it was handball Maradona.
That's one of the ones. There was another one as well where you played as a keeper. Trying to think what it was, but the Peter Shilton one was disappointing because it's one of the best goalkeepers in the world. But you play the game and it's just like kind of all set pieces.
Yeah, it was exactly. That's exactly what it was.
And you can only move forward a few yards. You can't actually rush out. So you're playing a world-class keeper, but you're doing it hamstrung as sort of the Sunday League amateur.
With your arms tied behind your back.
And then, you're tied by the AI, aren't you? I know FIFA did it later, didn't they, with the pro mode and that, but you are tied. You're tied by how good the AI is.
But those late 80s games, man, with like the Gaza games, and even there was, as you said earlier, Richard, there was a lot of dross, wasn't there? Even the first Manchester United game, Manchester United in Europe was really good. I haven't been back to it. But, it pains me to say, but even the official Liverpool game was pretty ropey, wasn't it? Jim, is there any games that you wanted to ask Richard about that we haven't covered?
No,
I mean, obviously we're not going through it on a game by game basis, but is there anything that you wanted to kind of mention?
I just wanted to quickly shout out the handheld section because, again, it's like I suppose a subgenre, if you like, that doesn't really get a lot of press. And I know growing up, like I spent a lot of time with the Nintendo World Cup on the Game Boy, and like I said earlier, like FIFA on the Game Boy. So I wanted to just see it, like you mentioned earlier, Chris. You see these screenshots and these write-ups. You think that was my game, and that's yeah.
I mean, those early handheld games, I imagine Richard would have struggled to go back to, weren't they?
Oh yeah, I can imagine they were.
I think there was one on the Game Boy, wasn't there, that you feature? And I can't imagine that can be much fun these days.
Yeah, it was pretty rough playing the early handheld things. The one that I had grown up with was Elite Soccer, which was basically a port of Striker. that I wouldn't say it held up well, but it's still playable.
Yeah,
you can still have a bit of fun with it. Just you got to appreciate that it's on the Game Boy, and so it's there's not much it can do. But the really early handheld games are very rough to play. A couple of them I could barely handle. They were so bad.
Was there a temptation to look at the any of the LCD type football games at all, or?
Yeah, I thought a little bit about it, but it's getting into some messy ground when you're thinking about those. Like, are they video games? I don't want to get into
they're more toys, aren't they?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
But the handheld stuff, I was surprised by how good it got in like the PSP days.
Even the GBA, I thought wasn't there a good version of ISS on the GBA, if I remember?
I was about to say, on the GBA, it was really uneven. Which was, I suppose, not surprising. I think that's probably something you could say about the console, the system in general.
Yeah.
But there was a great ISS game on there.
Yeah.
There was a kind of a Sensi clone, Total Soccer, that was pretty fun. There's almost a player manager game, like what Player Manager is to Kickoff. This game is to Total Soccer, David O'Leary's Total Soccer. It's lightweight management things, kind of fun. But then there's also David Beckham Soccer, which it's in my relegation zone, the GBA version of that. It was
anything with David Beckham in it goes in the relegation zone.
Well, you could say Michael Owen as well. That was with Michael Owen World League Soccer. I think that was a bit of a stinker, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's one of those ones where I think they needed more time. They had the beginnings of something that could be a good game. That was the more arcadey style of football, but they weren't able to properly get it done. The AI is still crap. The goalkeepers are like useless. The animations need more tuning, possibly even go back into the mocap room and do it again.
Oh dear. Look, it's been fascinating chatting about it, and as I've said, I feel like there's an element of lightning in a bottle with this. I can't imagine how it must have felt starting this project and thinking, however am I going to cover this number of games? But I think you've absolutely nailed it. I think the way you've approached it was spot on. And as I said, for anybody of our generation who grew up with these games, even if you don't read it from cover to cover, you just flick through it. There's so much in there. It's such a rich tome of nostalgia. It's so good. We've said it releases on the 17th of October, which will be released by the time people listen to this. Where can people get hold of it, Richard?
So you can get it directly from Bitmap Books. If someone listening happens to be in the US, I think they sell stuff on Amazon. If you're in Australia, like me, there's a Pixel Crib. They're great. But for everyone else who doesn't have to pay an arm and a leg for shipping, the way to go is to go to bitmapbooks.com, and at least for the time being, it'll be very prominent on the website there. I think we do have a short URL you can use, footybook.net. Footybook.net. That's footy with a Y. Will redirect you straight to the product page for the standard edition. We also have a Captain's Edition limited release, which is the standard in a hard slipcase thing with a Captain's armband around it. It's really fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
My wife tells me that she's already pre-ordered, so she better have ordered the Captain's Edition. She's in trouble. You must hate it when people say stuff like this, Richard, because the book's not even out yet. But what any plans for any other? Seeing what you've done here, any plans for any other kind of similar sport chronicles? I'd love to see something on, like, I don't know, like a wider thing about sports games, or I don't know. Like, have you thought about what could be the next project?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what's going to be next, and it's one of those annoying things where I have a lot more ideas than I have time for. But on the sports front, there's a couple of things I've been thinking about. One is to look at golf games, because that's a similar thing. People grew up playing these games, often with their father, and you've got this nice technological evolution that kind of peters out. 10, 15 years ago, same thing.
Yeah, very similar to the football games. Yeah, very. Yeah,
yeah.
There's
a nice variety with the likes. Think about the likes of Neo Turf Masters compared to Leaderboard and stuff like that. There's a nice spread of games there.
Yeah. A lot of cool stuff there, and I've spent a lot of time, as I said at the start, playing golf on the Game Boy with my dad, and then later playing Jack Nicklaus 4. That was our game together in the late 90s. So there's that. I've also been thinking about a more journalistic look at sports games and how they intersect with the world of real sport. I think there's a lot to be said there, a lot to look at. I've sort of been flicking around different ideas on how that might work. If I do go ahead with it, I'm going to need to spend a lot of time on sort of a discovery phase of just learn everything. So I know skateboarders have been influenced by Tony Hawk, and that's sort of gone this cyclical thing there. I know a lot of footballers play football games, and sometimes they'll try moves that they've done in FIFA, that kind of thing. And it's sort of it's affected sports fandom. How people interact with sport has changed through these games. So there's a lot to look at and understand. I've also been thinking about lots of other things, like some more nostalgia stuff, like screensavers might be the next thing that I'm pitching. It's just something that's out there.
That stuff, isn't there?
Yeah,
there is nostalgia.
Yeah, very much, and. I think that there's potential for something not at this scale, not a 600-page book. But like
600 pages of screensavers might be a stretch.
Maybe a 200, 300-page coffee table book would be kind of cool on screensavers or something like that. And then there's like lots of individual games I'd love to look at, or companies. But I've got to factor in that I am one person. And even if I've got someone like Sam doing the design work for me and I'm only writing the words,
that's a huge amount of work.
Book is a massive undertaking.
For sure.
And I'm making documentaries at the same time, so like I've got sort of two jobs that I'm doing, and I'm a parent, and there's only so much time in the day.
We both know how that feels. Jim, is there anything else, anything that I've missed, any burning questions for Richard before we let him go and enjoy his day?
No, I was just going to say, obviously we're maybe running a little bit late, but I just wanted to say, I absolutely love it. And when you think back on the football games where they've gone from just like this like a pixel, like a Pong variant, to where like FIFA is now, and it's. Like my lad, he's got mates, they all play FIFA together, and some of them don't even like football. So it's just, the football genre is just so massive. And like I say, it feels like there's not that much written about it.
Yeah. Until now.
Until now.
Richard, thank you so much for doing the book in the first place, you and Sam, but also for taking time out of your morning to chat to us. We wish you all the very best. And we'll certainly be making sure that our listeners are aware of the book and know where to get it. And this podcast obviously has done that. So
and I'm looking forward to seeing Terabytes, seeing all that.
Yes,
is that next year? I think.
Yeah. So Terabytes is a horror documentary series, and should be out unless we have to delay it. It'll be out around the end of March or April next year.
Cool.
5-part series, each about an hour long. We recently finished an episode on FMV horror games, which is really fun.
That sounds really good.
And we're working on one on licensed horror games right now. So like each episode sort of this slice of the genre, because horror is just so broad. You guys have talked a bit about it on the show. You can go so many different ways with it, and so we decided we'll take some slices out of the genre and look at how those have evolved and see what we can learn about kind of what's the essence of horror from that, and why do people play horror games.
Jim needs no excuse to play Night Trap again. Do you, Jim?
Wait, having just played Resident Evil, I'm more than up for some horror games.
Richard, thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Best of luck with the book and for Terabytes next year. And to our listeners, Jim and I will be back very soon, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.